Welcome to our webinar. Today we're talking about creating a culture of empathy, the look, sound, and feel of empathy in the workplace. My name is David Cory, the founder, president, CEO of the Emotional Intelligence Training Company. This is our 28th year. We just celebrated our 28th anniversary in February of this year. And we have been doing this a long time. We've had a lot of experience in talking with the organizations about developing leadership to develop certain kinds and types of cultures. And today we're going to talk about creating a culture of empathy. And I thought it would be interesting to imagine what would empathy look like if we were to see it in action? What would it sound like? What would it feel like? And before we dive into that, and of course we'll talk about some of the things that you can actually do to work toward creating a culture of empathy in your workplace. And so I thought we'd start off by talking about what culture actually is. And so of course you're all familiar with the term, and I like to think about them as kind of like unwritten rules. If you think back to your first day on the job at your current workplace, how did you learn about the culture? Well, you watched and you learned. You saw where people went for coffee. You saw what time people generally arrived at the workplace, and you tried to adapt and to fit into the current culture. And so we of course we have country culture, we have ethnic culture, and many different kinds of cultures. Wherever people gather, whenever people are part of a group, they tend to develop their own culture. And so this includes shared values, beliefs, customs, behaviors, and these determine the interactions that take place within that organization, affects decision making, influences effectiveness. And so we really need to pay attention to culture, and we don't often. If someone were to ask you to describe the culture of your current workplace, what would that be like? And I think back to when I worked for a big organization, and I can describe that culture in quite a detailed way. What I think is interesting is that it was a post-secondary institution, and so it was quite relaxed. As I think back, the difference between a post-secondary institution, public sector, government-funded organization versus being an entrepreneur. That's a very different kind of culture. Whereas as an entrepreneur, I'm constantly thinking about the business. I feel like I'm hustling every day, trying to get new business, trying to make new contacts, trying to learn new ways of doing things. But in the post-secondary institution, it was pretty laid back. We took time to have coffee and have long lunches, and there wasn't the kind of pressure that there is in a private sector organization, which is more profit focused, etc. And you can pretty much describe the kind of workplace that you're most familiar with as well. So how did it get to be that way? I often thought if people had to justify their salaries, how would they go about doing that in a public sector organization? Could they do it? And they rarely think about it. So all of that is really interesting. In a small business like ours, we are looking at costs very carefully. We're looking at the costs of salaries, at the costs of subcontracting services, and we're looking at dates and deadlines and feeling that pressure. And so that all feeds into the culture as well. What if we were to create a culture of empathy? Well, let's turn our attention to thinking about that for a moment. First of all, let's start with what empathy is. Now, empathy, as you all know, is a huge topic. There's so much about empathy, and so we're just going to give a quick, maybe abbreviated definition of empathy for purposes of our webinar today. And we're going to say that first and foremost, it's about paying attention. Do you attend to the emotions of others? And this is an interesting question that we frequently discuss with leaders that we coach one-to-one. We're talking about, do you pay attention? And then, of course, there's understanding the emotions of others. This is part of empathy, and this, to some extent, distinguishes between what they call cognitive empathy, which is really, having some information about emotions and knowing how emotions can motivate people to take certain actions and behaviors, and understand that if something has happened in their personal life and they're feeling sad, how that might affect their motivation to attend to their work that they have to do on that particular day. So this is what they call cognitive emotion. Then there's affective emotion, which includes appreciating the feelings of others and actually caring about the feelings of others. Some say that many of you know that familiar Brene Brown cartoon about empathy, where she says, talks about finding something in you that knows that feeling. And I don't know about that, but we certainly have to care about that. We certainly feel it when someone recognizes that emotion in us. They don't have to be feeling the exact same thing, I don't believe, but really to try to put yourself in someone's position, trying to understand it from their perspective. And really, what we want is connection. The purpose of empathy is it allows us to relate to others. And isn't it interesting that relate is the root word of the word relationships? That empathy allows us to relate to others. And you all know the Brene Brown TED Talk, her very first one, which made her famous, where she says, connection is why we're here. Connection is the reason for us human beings. And I love that. Empathy, critical and important for humans, and we want to turn our attention to the workplace. So what are the benefits of empathy in the workplace? When employees feel like their leaders and team members are paying attention to their emotions, it actually increases employee engagement. And there are studies that show this. I'm going to make reference to a couple of articles where we've got citations from studies. Retention of talent. When we feel cared for, we're going to stick around. And again, when people are practicing empathy intentionally with others, it causes us to feel cared for and like we are valued. When empathy is paid attention to, it creates a supportive environment where people feel safe to innovate, safe to create, safe to do things differently, better, look for improvements. When leaders are watching for the emotions of others, paying attention to the emotions of employees, they could spot burnout before it causes someone to go off on stress leave. Empathy strengthens relationships. When we pay attention to relationships, when we care about people, that comes through. It strengthens that connection, that bond that we have with others, fosters collaboration. Of course, we want to work in collaborative workplaces, which leverages diversity, which takes advantage of the fact that all these people have different perspectives and they bring different perspectives to the problem-solving, decision-making, innovation process. It enhances effective conflict resolution. When we care about someone else, when we care about their emotions, then we're much more interested in engaging in a conflict management resolution process where we can look for what the interests are. We can move out of our positions to looking at how can all of our interests be served. It is required to create psychological safety, and isn't that interesting that psychological safety is one of the things that we are after, even if we don't know the term. It is something that we're trying to create in our workplaces. We want people to believe that their ideas, questions, concerns are valued and supported, and where mistakes are considered integral to learning, creativity, innovation, and growth. Not something to be punished, to be sanctioned, to be disciplined, but mistakes are just going to happen because we're human. And we allow for mistakes. We take the lead in admitting to our mistakes. We role model the way we want mistakes viewed in the workplace. That perfection is not a goal for us human beings. Excellence, sure, great. Let's try to strive for excellence, but perfection, not a goal for us. And so we need to be softer on people. Hard on problems, soft on people. Why is empathy important for business? It's critical to create psychological safety. Companies that create high psychological safety experience 76% more employee engagement. I'm not really sure how they did that. I'd be interested in the details. 50% more productivity. 29% more life satisfaction. And this comes from a Forbes article, December 2025. It's called The Business Case for Empathy at Work, what the research says. So we know this to be true. We know it anecdotally and experientially, and we've got scientific research to support this view of empathy being important for business. Talent leaves organizations where they don't feel cared for. This is another article. Lack of empathy means lack of belonging. If we are not intentionally trying to create belonging, people don't feel like they belong, and they're probably going to leave. And it doesn't make any sense when you consider the cost of recruiting, screening, onboarding, training, getting people up to speed in their jobs. It doesn't make any sense to have managers treat them poorly so that they end up leaving. So we want managers to understand the critical importance of empathy for their leadership effectiveness. Once again, I mentioned this earlier, but when we can recognize that people may be overloaded, overburdened, that they might be nearing burnout, then we can do something about it. We can intervene and help that person before they have to go off on stress leave. This was an interesting mention in this article. Gen Z and millennials expect empathy. They've been socialized to expect empathy. And if you think about that and think about some of us, you include yourself or not in this group, but the helicopter parent idea. We really, cared for those kids and they grew up expecting that every adult in their life is going to care for them, including their manager. And so they're looking for managers who are watching out for them, who are paying attention to how they're feeling about things, and they kind of expect it. And if you want that top talent that's coming out of the Gen Z millennial generations, then of course you're going to figure this out in your organization. You're going to make sure that your managers are operating with empathy. Here's the reference for that article. MENA stands for Middle East, North Africa. It is a general term, but apparently they have a website called MENAspeakers.com where they have articles, and this one was empathy and leadership. And they were talking about KPIs, key performance indicators for empathy. And so I got some ideas from there to be sure that you'll see here in this webinar. I thought it would be interesting to imagine what would empathy look like in a workplace. If you were to look around, what would you see? What would you witness? What would you notice in terms of behavior of employees, team members, leaders within organizations? And I was thinking, maybe you'd see people really listening to each other, really leaning in, really taking time to listen, to listen for learning. Quite often we're listening to create our response to someone instead of listening for learning. So when we're really leaning in, listening, wondering what it's like from their perspective, listening to their perspective, knowing that their perspective is going to contribute, is going to add value to the way that you're thinking about something, that critical reality testing that we know from the EQ model that we use. This is going to help us with our own reality testing, is really listening to each other. Leaders going out of their way to recognize employees. You would hear them stopping people in the hall, or you would see them stopping people in the hall, and maybe saying something like, "Hey, I just want to recognize the great work that you've been doing," something like that. And You'd see employees acknowledging each other. I remember I worked at a satellite office, and then I was promoted up to the head office, and I arrived at head office, which was a cube farm, just lots of cubes for on and that went on and on and on. But I also noticed something because our satellite office was kind of small. We were a family, and we all knew each other. We liked each other. We did this things socially together. Then I went up to head office, and people didn't even seem to acknowledge each other. In the mornings, and I thought this was so odd. You'd see someone walking towards you, and they would kind of avert your connection with your eyes, and I thought that was so odd. I thought, I wonder if I can do anything. I wonder if it's possible to do something about this. And so every morning I would kind of bend over and try to catch their eyes, and I would say good morning. And if I didn't know their name, I would ask their name. And I just kept doing this. And then I started seeing others doing it with each other. So you can absolutely make an impact if you want. Now, I was young and brash, and I thought I knew everything. I was kind of arrogant. So I did it, not really thinking that there was going to be any kind of negative impact. It turns out there wasn't any negative impact. And I actually saw people stopping by other people's cubes and sort of saying good morning and talking with them after that. Whereas prior to that, looked like to me, everybody just went straight to their cubicle and did their work on their own, which seemed to me a real shame. So we can strike up that kind of interaction, and really paying attention to the emotions of others. You'd see people paying attention to the emotions of others, and maybe noticing that something might be wrong or something might be off, or not quite what you want, or what's applicable or appropriate for the workplace. Intervening when someone seems different than usual. Now, if you've ever had someone intervene when you don't quite seem yourself, you know what this is about. And we're going to talk about what you would hear if you heard an intervention very, very soon. What other demonstrations or behaviors of empathy can you think about? Please feel free to type them into the chat box. I haven't really been paying attention to the chat box so far, so yeah, just feel free to use the chat box and type some things. Presence, yes, thanks, John. Absolutely, you'd see people really showing up fully. And some of these are not directly related, like they're not the skill of empathy, but they're empathy related for sure, because when we start paying attention to authenticity, yes, thank you so much for that. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Craig. When dealing with poor health, caring for ill family members, people offering to help take care of your stuff, absolutely, Jennifer, this is absolutely the kind of thing that I'm thinking about, that I'm wanting to notice and observe. Intention, yes, Jennifer. Confidence, absolutely, Adir, thank you. Allowing people to bring their authentic self to work. Yes, these are the kinds of things that are all kind of, if they're not empathy directly, they're empathy adjacent, they're empathy related. And this is the kind of thing that I want us to be thinking about. Leadership, absolutely, Chantal. So what about what empathy sounds like in the workplace? What would you hear people actually saying? So here are some of the things that I thought about. People saying, "How are you doing?" No, really, I want to know, not just how are you as a pleasantry. It's how are you doing? Really, like stopping, facing someone and saying, "How are you doing?" Really. Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Yes, people just want to be seen, heard, safe. These are some of the goals of empathy. Absolutely. that was a great contribution you made. Now, many of you know my partner Jill, and Jill said, "I don't think that's empathy." Well, again, I want to make the argument for empathy adjacent, that it may not be empathy directly. That was a great contribution, but if you're using your empathy and you know that someone could really use that kind of acknowledgement, then I think this is something that you might hear, which is evidence of a culture of empathy in the workplace. I appreciate you. That's another one. It's not directly empathy to say I appreciate you, but it's knowing that when we appreciate people, it's a bit of a boost to their mood. Particularly if we are a leader. That's something that's so important. My leader told me that they appreciated me today is something that employee is going to carry with them. What can I do for you? That desire to help, desire to support, the desire to lighten the load, as someone commented in the chat box, when you know someone's going through some sort of struggle personally, offer to take something off their plate, etc. I think this is once again empathy adjacent. That these offers of help. I want to understand. So you know that they're trying to explain their perspective to you. It may not make sense to you. You might not. You might be pretty sure it couldn't work, or it's not a useful or helpful idea. But you want to understand more from their perspective. So to check out by saying, "I want to understand your perspective. I want to understand your point of view. I want to understand your contribution here," is knowing that that's going to again impact someone emotionally. I need your input on this. Isn't it always nice to be asked, even if you're busy and and it seems like a bit of a hassle? When someone says, "I need your input," they're communicating that they value our knowledge, our skill, our expertise, what we know, and it's kind of nice to hear. And so again, I think it's not directly empathy, but it's evidence of empathy. It's something that you might hear in a workplace where there's a culture of empathy. Here's the intervention. This is what you would hear someone say who's actually intervening, someone who's paying attention and using their empathy and saying, "You don't seem yourself today. What's going on? Would you like to talk about it? I couldn't help but notice, and I'm just wondering, if you feel comfortable talking about it with me." And of course, if you don't have much of a relationship with that person, you don't know them very well, then they may decline your offer to talk about it or discuss something. But you've acknowledged, you've noticed, you've acknowledged. These are a couple of the important steps in empathy. And again, depending on the relationship, they will share with you or not share with you. And we kind of have to be okay with that. But we made the effort. We made the attempt. This is another one I thought about in response to Jill's criticism that these weren't exactly empathy. Well, noticing that someone rolled their eyes in a meeting is empathy, I think. It's like, okay, so you communicated an emotion with your face that you didn't say in the meeting, and I just want to know. I want to understand that feeling that you had as a result of what was being said, what was being discussed, what was there. And oftentimes we let these things go. And it's unfortunate because it doesn't lead to a clearer shared understanding of a situation. What it means is, oh, that person is not supportive of that idea that was discussed, and so they're out. And so we just kind of write them out of the plan, out of the project, out of the work, and it might absolutely not be right or even fair, because that person part of their responsibility is to get this work done. So we need to know what the eye roll is about. You can't just roll your eyes and expect not to be held accountable for that. And so I think that's part of empathy too. Again, we're looking for the emotions. What are people feeling? What are people feeling that they're not communicating? And I think all of that is part of empathy. Now, here's an interesting. Oh, there's the question. What else is empathy? What else does empathy sound like? What would you hear people saying that you would consider to be empathy? So I'm just going to take a quick look in the acknowledgement. Absolutely, John. Yes. Um, and anything else that you think might sound like empathy in the workplace? Okay, so I don't see a flurry of comments jumping into the chat box, so we'll move on. Acknowledging, not fixing. I'm here for you. Yes, yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Nick. Acknowledging, not fixing. Yes, because we are fixers. We want to fix stuff when people tell us about a problem or a situation. We want to jump straight to solution when maybe that's not what they need. They need someone to simply listen. I thought, one of the things that I think that empathy feels like in the workplace is that you feel cared for. Now, many of you know that we do this exercise. We've done this exercise hundreds of times with groups of managers all over the world, many different cultures, and we've asked them to tell us about the best leader they ever had. And the lists all look very similar. And one of those things that they said that their best leader did was to make them feel cared for, that they cared about them as a human being, not just a worker. And a lot of the words on this slide are from those workshops that people said they felt like they mattered, they felt worthy, they felt deserving of being there, of being part of that team, of being part of that project, on that project. They felt valued, they felt trusted. And so I thought this was really interesting to kind of notice some of these words from the many flip charts. I take photographs of every flip chart, by the way. I have hundreds of these photographs of flip charts from all over the world. And one day I'm going to take a look at that data and compile it. They talked about feeling like a human being, not just a worker. And isn't that interesting? What's the difference between a worker and a human being? Well, I think when you see someone, view someone as a worker, I think you're kind of seeing them as someone who can do the job, who can provide the work, apply the technology, has the technical expertise. And then, in terms of who does that, it's almost, it becomes less relevant to a team dynamic, for example. Many of you know that I've been doing this webinar on our artificial intelligence and emotional intelligence for some time now, and that always causes me to think about this idea of the AI agent, the AI worker. Many of you know that that people are talking about creating an agent for you. Well, that AI agent is not human. They can't. It doesn't feel emotions. It can simulate some and sound like some human emotions are coming from that AI, but it's not human. It doesn't have an emotional response. And I think when we treat people like workers, we treat people as if they don't have any emotions. And just think about what that does to employee engagement, to treat someone like a worker versus a human being. Think about what it does to retention. Do you want to stick around where people just treat you like a worker and not a human being, and you know it, you notice it, you feel it? I don't think so. So again, there's all kinds of business cases to be made for empathy in the workplace, and yet we just don't necessarily always think about it in this way. Belonging. Again, belonging, retention. You will stay where you feel like you belong. You won't stay where you don't feel like you don't belong. And so it's interesting to think about how we treat people, how we behave, what sorts of leadership behaviors can cause these emotions. You feel safe where empathy is demonstrated. You feel safe to be authentic. You feel safe to be who you are. You feel safe and like you belong even though you may be different in some way from the rest of the team, from others, for whatever reason, whatever makes you different than the rest of that group, that population, you feel a sense of safety nonetheless and belonging. Motivation came up frequently in that someone's making green lines on the screen. Is that me? I don't think I'm doing that. Um, in any case, um, yeah, I don't know how those green lines got there. In any case, we do feel motivated where we feel cared for. We feel motivated. We feel inspired. We frequently talk in those executive and managerial sessions that we've had with organizations all over the world. We talk about them about the quality of their work with that best leader, and it was the highest quality that they've ever had in their lives when they were with those best leaders, the highest quality work. They made their best effort. They gave their all. They gave of their discretionary effort, which we give or hold back based on how we feel. Inspired. People feel inspired in organizations that are characterized by empathy. And of course, there could be many others. And if something comes to mind, please feel free to type it into the chat box. Yeah, I like it. I like it. Yes, thank you for that. Owner versus renter. Yeah, absolutely. Feels as though you're included, part of the team. Trust is broken, relationship strained. Feel very different. Absolutely. Let's look at how culture change happens. And once again, if you were somehow responsible for creating those green lines, maybe you can erase them. Not that they're a big deal. Do others see that, or is it just me? You see that? You see? Okay, thank you for taking those away. Whoever made them. Okay, culture change happens one interaction at a time. This is something that occurs to me. I've never read this anywhere. I've never seen this anywhere. I'm probably not the only person to ever think about this, but it occurs to me that culture change happens one interaction at a time. We have many interactions throughout a workday. Now, though in those interactions, what are our choices? It seems to me that we have possibly three choices, depending on the level of our leadership skill and knowledge. And the first one is the one where we really we are really dodging or ducking our leadership responsibility to make things better, and we just maintain the status quo. We know how things go around here, and we are just going to behave in ways that conform, that fit into the status quo, and that is an option. And certainly there are times when we choose this option. It's easy, it's expedient, it requires little effort. But then there are those times where we notice and we decide that, again, we're going to demonstrate, practice a little leadership here. We're going to take some leadership to maybe shift this culture in the direction that we want it to go, to nudge it in the direction that we want to go. What would that sound like? What would that look like? What would we do if we were to nudge it in the direction that we want it to go? Or finally, again, this is going back to the challenge the old culture. That's what I did when I was much younger and starting out in that head office. I decided I'm changing this because I don't like the old one. I don't like the old culture where nobody looks at each other or pays attention or even greets each other in the hallway. I'm challenging that. I'm changing it, and this requires more leadership skill and ability, and we can train people to do this. We can actually provide people with the skills and the knowledge to be able to challenge the old culture. When you recognize the old culture, when you see ways that the old culture, which is not good for people, where there's no empathy, when that happens, you can intervene. You can speak up about it. You can do things. And of course, what are those things? Well, I decided to group those things back into the observable, the audible, and look at what can we do? Well, we can care. Again, we can care about these workers that report to us or that we have on our teams. We can care about them as human beings. Do I know about them? Do I know them? Have I ever asked about their families, their hobbies, their outside interests? Have I really listened to them to hear what they value, what their dreams are, what their plans for the future are? Have I ever recognized the good works that they do? Have I ever acknowledged something? Have I ever paid attention to what I think they're trying to say when they're not speaking directly about how they're feeling about things? Am I really paying attention? Have I ever intervened? Have I ever said, "Hey, you don't quite seem yourself today. Is something going on?" And we need to speak up. And those of you familiar with the EQ model we use, you'll recognize that as assertiveness. That assertiveness allows us, when we practice it, when we learn the skills, when we learn the steps, it allows us to speak up and do some of these actions. What about what we might say? What would be some of those phrases, some of those words that we might hear? Well, going back to the previous slide, it might be the "how are yous" and "how are you" in a way that implies that we really want to know. How's it going for you? How's that project going? I know that there was something, you had a family event over the weekend. How was that? These kinds of things that when leaders can learn to do this well, and of course, one of the those of you who are older definitely know this. Those of you who are younger may not know this, but there was a fashionable leadership practice that went around in the late 80s, early 90s called management by walking around. It was a term coined by Tom Peters, and it encouraged leaders to get their coffee in the coffee room first thing in the morning, and then walk around with your coffee, check in with people, see how they're doing. And this was such a great suggestion because really it was something that you would definitely see, an action that relates with empathy. And then, of course, what you would say when you sit down on the corner of someone's desk, if it's possible, how are you? You've been doing a great job lately. I just really appreciate the work that you're putting in. Is there anything I can do for you? I need your input on something. Or you don't really seem yourself today. You don't quite have the usual spring in your step. You don't quite have the usual smile in your face. I just wanting to let you know that I noticed it. And again, depending on the relationship that you've built with someone, you can offer to listen if they want to talk about something. And then finally, this last one, I noticed your smile turned into a frown when I mentioned this new project. I noticed you rolled your eyes when I talked about how great something was going to be. And I just want to know what's behind that. What's that about? What is the feeling that is related to that facial expression, that body language that you that I couldn't help but notice because I was paying attention? These kinds of things. Now, this is something that occurred to me again, thinking back to those emotions that we saw from the flip charts that people talked about with the best leader that they ever had, the impact on them. We have two columns in that best leader, worst leader exercise. The first column is qualities, behaviors. What did that leader do? What did they say? How did they treat you? And the second column is impact. And so many of these emotions come from that impact column. And again, while they may be directly empathy related, some may be empathy adjacent, but this one I think is empathy correlated. That the greater the empathy that leaders have for others, the more you feel cared for. And so what do you have to do so people feel cared for? You have to care. Care so people feel cared for. Why do we pay attention? Because people matter. They matter to us. How do you let someone know that they matter? You pay attention to them. You ask them, how's it going? You inquire, you ask them how they're feeling about things, how they're feeling about the project, how they're feeling about the hours, how they're feeling about the technology that they're using. Because how they feel about those things matters to all of the metrics, the engagement, the retention, the productivity, the customer service, all of those outcomes. And this is why we can make the business case for emotional intelligence and empathy as a strategic capability, because they are directly connected. Our emotions are directly connected to all of those measurable business outcomes. We can make that case very easily. How do you have people feel valued? You value them. What would you do if you wanted to value someone? Well, you would tell them that you value them. You would, again, include them on projects. You would share information with them. Transparency, interestingly, is an interesting way to have people feel valued. And you're going to use your empathy to kind of gauge how people are responding to your sharing of information. You're being transparent. You're saying, listen, I don't know much, but what I know is this, and sharing that with them. How do you help people feel trusted? You trust them, right? You delegate the work, you delegate the responsibility, the authority, the control over that project, over that work, and you trust them to come through. And they feel trusted, and again, trust is earned. Trust can be easily damaged, and we want to be careful with trust. But let's start off by trusting people. Treat others like the human beings that they are. Once again, we know this because people have said that's important to them. They wrote it on a flip chart, that the impact on me of this best leader was I felt like a human being, not just a worker. Tell people they belong. Hey, you belong here. You belong with us. We appreciate you and everything that you bring to this team. We appreciate you for who you are, etc. We want to make it safe. How do you make it safe? Leaders are constantly asking, how do I make it safe? Well, you role model safety. You be the first one to admit responsibility, accountability, a mistake that was made, and you say, hey, I messed up. This is what happened. This is what I did. You show that you take responsibility, and you show that you quickly try to learn from that mistake and refocus the attention on how are we going to recover from this? How are we going to make up for this? What are we going to do differently moving forward? Inspire and motivate others through your optimism and share your passion for the work. And those of you who are familiar with our EQ model, you know that optimism is one of our EQ competencies that we measure, that we focus on in our coaching, and we occasionally get pushback from managers who say, I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist, I'm a realist. And I say, well, that's good. Being a realist is good, but it's not very inspiring. If your focus is risk management, if your focus is all the things that are going to go wrong, and you're not pointing out the benefits and sharing your enthusiasm for the project, it's not that motivating. It's not that inspiring. And certainly we need to share our passion for the work, so that, because we know that emotions are contagious. So what do you want people to catch from you? You want them to catch your passion for the work. So where to from here? Well, what we want to encourage everyone to do is to learn more about emotional intelligence. If you're not familiar with the model on the screen here, this model is the MHS model of EQ. Was originally created by Dr. Reuven Bar-On in the early 80s. It is the most researched model in the world. It has the best scientific validity research behind it. Many of the most progressive organizations in the world base their leadership development on this model. And if you don't know about it, then learn about it. Come take a course. Get a coach if you feel like you need to develop your skills to practice more empathy, to be more empathic, to learn more about empathy. Get a coach and develop your leadership skills. Bring training into your organization, training on empathy, training on workplace culture, training on leadership, training on team effectiveness, all these things that where we incorporate and build in and weave in all of these EQ competencies here as a way of learning more about how to be effective as in whatever role you happen to be in. This is all going to play a role and be a part of it. For any of the above, please feel free to contact us, discuss with us. We have created a new resource guide to help people who are wanting to bring more emotional intelligence and these ideas into their organization. Please feel free to email Eric and request our new resource guide. He will happily send you a copy. And if you are one of our alumni, great. Well, we're happy to send you a copy. If you are not currently one of our many wonderful illustrious alumni, then